We'll see how far we can get. This is not my normal voice. I think I must have left it in Queensland. Bit of adjustment for someone coming down from the north to this nice cool area. But what I wanted to do today was take you inside a principal's office. Not that you're in trouble. I'm not sure many of you would have ever been there. I had one visit when I was in high school to the principal's office. I actually didn't get inside his office. He met me outside and he said, "Brown, you're going from 3A to 3B. That was it. So I was in high school. He told me that I was moving from one class to another, and that was my interaction with the principal. And even though I ended up being a senior prefect of the school, there's just no interaction with him. But in my school, it's a little bit different, so I'm going to invite you in. What I'd like to do is to take you inside the classroom and inside the office and let you know how what's happening in 2024 is radically changing the issues that I need to deal with. So what I've done is I've gone to the newspapers. In Queensland, there's only one statewide paper called the Courier Mail. There's no other opposition to that. When it comes to government, we only have one House of Government. There's no Legislative Council. Queensland got rid of that, thinking that that was a smart move. We have an election coming up later on this year. It'll be interesting to see what actually transpires when that takes place. So, Courier Mail. I've got some articles for you to consider. The first one is, are smartphones damaging young people? This book says yes. This article came out in April 2024. And it's a quote from the work done by a gentleman called Jonathan Haidt, who actually talks about what social media has done to our young people. Around 2007, so here's the article, around 2007, two significant events occurred. First, the rise of the smartphone and social media, and within a few years, iPhone and Android phones became ubiquitous, and platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, and all the other issues started to surface. The second development, this is the article quoting the book, the second development was a noticeable decline in youth mental health across advanced countries. Rates of anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide worsened, especially among girls. Then in the paper there's this chart, and the chart shows what happens in 2004, 2006, and the number of young people in the States that have been diagnosed as major depression. Flat line. Come 2007, what happens to the line? Up it goes. And to the next 6 years, it goes up 184%. With somebody who's having to deal with young people, I know what the smartphones is doing. Here's the second article. Exclusion increasing across Queensland schools as physical aggression is on the rise. And I'll read you the quote. In 2023, there was an increased number, I won't give you all the figures here, for short-term and long-term suspended students for physical aggression. Among those were, and we're getting down to prep and year one, what number of students do you think in Queensland were suspended in year one or in prep, which is 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, were suspended? 1,770 students were suspended for aggression. Not just settle down, Johnny. Not, I need to help you, Johnny. But this student is now being so violent that the school has decided at a principal level that this student needs to be excluded for either short term or long term. That wouldn't have been happening in your school days. It's a new and it's a radical change that's taking place in our culture. Here's the next one that a school principal has to deal with these days. It's called school refusal. This article came out in January this year. School refusal, I'm reading you the headline. School refusal, where it's happening and how to spot it. 2 in 5 Queensland children from prep up are suffering from pronounced rates of school refusal. These are just not kids running the streets instead of coming to school. These are kids that are so caught up in themselves that they cannot go to school. They just refuse to go to school. I dealt with one of these. The parents had decided to call the police. It was a 12-year-old girl that would not go to school. And if you think about ringing the police to get someone to take you to school, it's not going to happen. This is part of the challenges of what's happening. And our title is The Authentic Humanism and the Crisis of Culture. So I wanted to take you inside the office and tell you what sort of things a principal in a school is now having to deal with. Let's move on to some other examples. This came out in January 2024. Headline: with youth suicide rates rising in Queensland, parents have lost children. Parents who have lost children are speaking out. The article goes on to say suicide is the leading cause of death for those aged 10 to 17, with 20 children dying of suicide in 2022-23, leading cause of death. What our young people are having to contend with mentally, emotionally, and if they need any help of how to commit suicide, where do they go? To their smartphone. Type it in. They'll find someone will give them the advice. Next one, May this year. Social media killed my boy. A quote from some parents. Just 30 minutes to claim a bright young life. What happened was a 45-year-old gentleman posed himself as a 15-year-old girl, went out to the internet to find someone that he could chat to and asked for a photo. This 15-year-old boy responded, only to find out that he had been had. As a result of the fallout of all of that, the shame that followed for him meant that as a 15-year-old boy, he took his own life. Sexting. What an incredible problem young men have got at the moment of being asked for a photo or asking for a photo and seeing the fallout of that. Now, some of you from Victoria would know that this was a case that took place just recently where the Premier of Victoria, as quoted in the Queensland paper, was sat under the heading of disgraceful. Premier slams misogynistic AI fake nudes of students at elite school. Any Victorians here? You know the school I'm talking about? Up to 50 young girls have been targeted with pictures of their faces used to create explicit images. So this young boy, 15-year-old, with all the hormones racing through his body, with AI technology, with his laptop right in front of him, what's he done? Well, he's used that to create some images that's ended up with him being charged by the police. I would never have to face that sort of issue as a principal. You might have someone who's just scratched some sort of picture somewhere on the school toilet door, but not to this level of creativity and the outcome that we see. Here's another one. Elite Brisbane school students think they're animals in new woke trend. A handful of students in an elite Brisbane girls' school, the most elite, have been identifying as animals, walking on all fours and cutting holes in their uniform for a tail, in a move that has created confusion and concern among parents. Sounds bizarre, but I know in my town of Toowoomba in Queensland, one of the state schools, they have a little, by request from the students, they've had to put some litter in the garden. Weird. Who'd ever think that a principal would have to handle something like that? Here's another one. Department of Education confirms unisex toilets installed at Brisbane State High School in April 2024. A prestigious Queensland high school has converted a female-only toilet block to unisex with accusations of male students intimidating female classmates, urinating on toilet seats and sanitary bins after the change was introduced just 3 days ago. And some principals got to handle that sort of issue. Then we move on to Courier Mail on April 2024. Porn literacy push for school students. Consent education became mandatory for all school students in May 2023. Now there are calls to also focus on porn literacy, with rates of students accessing explicit material a public health issue. I got out of the principalship 2 years ago when I retired, but I'm still fascinated with what's going on. I'm on a couple of boards of various schools because I want to try to help where I can. But listen to those list of articles just this year. And students are having to face that, parents are having to face that, principals are having to face that. And where do you get training to handle those sorts of issues? Well, hopefully you picked up some wisdom along the way that you could apply. But what a challenge our society is facing. And then we move down to an article in March of this year under the heading of the Courier Mail. NHS decision to ban puberty blockers for children stirs up debate. 2 weeks out from the release of a long-awaited review into Queensland's Children's Genders Clinic, the English National Health Service, NHS, has made a major call. Some of you will know about it, the CAS review. As a result of the CAS review, they've made some changes in England in terms of how they're handling the question of students who are wanting to go through some sort of transition and receive treatment for that. What the CAS report shows, if you download it, was in 2004, there were about 15 girls that were considering the issue of transitioning. By 2019, that number of 15 had grown to 1,171. Why is there this sudden uptake? And that's because our culture has lost its bearings over what it is to be a human, what it is to be the person you are, and we have thrown into the mix, students, go and explore all these things because you need to find out who you are. And when they do start exploring, look what happens. Without guidance, these people are ending in peril. And schools are trying to navigate this. What's the response of government? Well, they come up with ideas like consent education. They form committees like the National Respectful Relationships Education Expert Working Group. How'd you like to be on that one? The 8th meeting provided members with an update on the Respectful Relationships Education Framework and final report being developed by Monash University's Gender and Family Violence Prevention Centre. When finalised, the framework will inform the ongoing delivery of consent and respectful relationships education in schools from 2024. And you thought that a school's just teaching your son or daughter maths and English. It's not like that anymore. So because of the social problems that there are, it's interesting to see government's response. Who's the group that they're ignoring in all of this process? Families. Families get overlooked. So where does the funding go? Where does the emphasis go? Bypasses the parents, bypasses the family, and goes straight to the school. And what's the school supposed to do about it? What training have the teachers got, or the leadership got, to deal with any of these issues that I've been talking about? Well, the government also decides not only to come up with a consent education, and why students that are in formative years are needing consent education for sexual exploration is beyond my understanding. But the government's come up with another program called the National Student Wellbeing Program. The National Student Wellbeing Program supports students and school communities' wellbeing in over 3,000 school communities. And they set aside $61 million to do that. Participating schools can receive up to $20,000 in metropolitan areas and $24,000 in remote areas. All right, sitting in my office, I've got $20,000 to play with this year to help my 1,000 students with wellbeing. How am I going to do that with $20,000? That was going to give me maybe someone one person, one day a week for 1,000 students. Nice that the government's giving me money because I'll find some way of spending it, but is it going to solve the problem? No. I'm left with the problem. Government thinks it's fixed it by giving me some money, starting a program, starting a group that is going to educate me, and then suddenly I've got to find a way to implement it. The biggest challenge with all of these things, and I'd include the national curriculum in this, is that it just keeps lumping things on top of the school. So it's like, how do you continue to deal with all of these things when the time hasn't changed, nothing's been taken away, but more things are being added to you? Well, I'm not trying to make it sound dismal for you, but I'm just trying to paint for you there is a crisis in our culture. Here's some good news. I was reading a book some time ago, and it challenged my whole thought about well-being. Because if you think about well-being, where does that tell a young person to look? Inside. The book challenged the thought of well-being. Why don't we change well-being to well-finding? Well-finding. Here's what he says. If well-being is about oneself, then it's likely to soon become a dry stream in a wilderness. Because the best me I can possibly be, to take one of the cliches of the well-being industry, is too narrow a horizon within which to explore life's possibilities. Well-finding, on the other hand, means locating a source, a gathering point, access to the depths, a guarantee of life for both oneself and one's village. It suggests a connection with the natural world. It honours our status as creatures and not as egos. If you can answer the question, where is the well in our village, you have a clue to answering the related question, where are the well in our village? Those of us who've been to third world countries will know what it's like to find the well, to find the source of life that has sustained the community that you're in. And so what I'd like to do this morning is to say, in the midst of all of these challenges that I've mentioned in a bit of an overview of what is happening in the world of education, what it is to try to understand what it means to be human, I want to go and find a well. I want to go and find a well that has sustained society to this point in time. And to do that, I'd like to invite 9 people to enter our room. Well, the only way they can really enter our room and talk to us is the things that they've written and the things they've left us. But here's my 9 that I'd like to interact with today. Aristotle, Cyrus the Great, Cicero, the Church Fathers, Augustine, Aquinas, Comenius, Lewis, and Piper. Well, how could you talk about those 9 in the allocated time today? But these are men who have given their lives to thinking and writing and contemplating and offering thoughts about what life is, how to go about it. And in one sense, I want to listen to these men and try to gain some wisdom as I'm handling today's issues in a principal's office. Because I need some help. I might have been a principal for 30 years, but I'm challenged by the things that are landing in the newspaper that would also be landing in my office if I was still in one. So we're going to go to these people. And I'm not sure I can do them justice in the time. But if they were here, I think they'd be talking about this. So let's jump over to Aristotle. I won't read you a quote that I've got, but I'd like to suggest to you that if Aristotle was saying here in his own way, he'd be saying eudaimonia. Eudaimonia. It's all about flourishing. That's the purpose of life, is to flourish. Eudaimonia is the ultimate aim of every human being, and all action and endeavours are pursued with the goal of attaining this state of well-being. If you asked our society, our current culture, what's the purpose of life? I don't think they'd give it the same answer. But the richness of our heritage is that flourishing, regardless of what circumstances you're finding in life, you can flourish where you are. Flourishing for us has almost been restricted to those who are highly successful, who are either very rich or very sporting in our country, or have something else that just makes them set apart. They have no problems in their world. Well, that one I want to put aside. What I want to say is, if you are terminally ill, you can still flourish. If you are poor and needy, you can flourish because of the way that you can approach every day and the meaning you can find that's in your life and flourish with the circumstances that you face. So school education, so connecting the two, what Aristotle would say about flourishing, I'd like to connect that now with what should a school do. A school must guide students towards understanding of eudaimonia, that the goal of life is to discover what it means to flourish both as an individual and as a member of a society. It's the two. And if you think about it, that's not a message that our young people would be hearing about now. They're not hearing about their responsibility to each other. They'd be thinking about, how do I get ahead? How do I succeed? And if I'm not got what I wanted, then I have missed the boat. That needs to be challenged. The second one I want to move over now is to invite Cyrus the Great into the room, and to speak on his behalf, we're going to ask Xenophon. Xenophon wrote a book called Cyropedia, The Education of Cyrus. And I discovered this after I retired. What a fabulous book. If you want to hear about someone who is destined to be a leader because of the lineage that he had, then I suggest you read this particular book. Because Cyrus, as we know, is in the scriptures, is prophesied about before he actually is born. He's going to be used by God. But as you read the story of Cyrus, who had for 10 years was king of the Persian Empire, but he was loved and adored by people who'd never met him. He helped with the restoration of Jerusalem. There was something about this man that made him different. And when you read about the way that he trained himself and educated himself in humility, in mercy, in moderation, when in one sense he didn't need to take those things on, you can see that his statement would be an example. His quote's terrific. Listen to this. "Let us educate our sons if sons are born to us. We cannot but become better ourselves if we strive to set the best example we can to our children. And our children could hardly grow up to be unworthy, even if they wished, when they see nothing base before them and hear nothing shameful, but live in the practice of all that is beautiful and good." What a view of life that a leader had. So Cyrus would be standing here today and telling us, make sure that in your education system, you got people that are walking the talk. Put in front of people that are dedicated to their well-being, people that are an example. Then we move on to Cicero. One of Cicero's last works, called De Officiis. He wrote this book not knowing that he was going to be assassinated the year after, but having seen what goes on in Rome, it most probably wasn't a surprise that he was on the hit list. But he wrote us a book. This book was for his son. And he wanted to say to his son, these are the things that you need to think about in terms of your responsibility into the future. And he said this to his son: in no part of life, whether in public, in private, in business affairs or in the household, whether you do something alone or enter into some agreement with other, can one be free of moral duties. In the cultivation of this duty in life, I found all things honest, and in the neglect of this responsibility, all things morally wrong. So Cicero would be saying, in light of what you face within your culture, I think you should be teaching the basis of moral decision making. And in his work here, he refers to two particular examples. One's called the choice of Hercules. The choice of Hercules is a famous myth about Hercules having the choice between virtues and vice. Handel wrote a oratorio about this whole story. Understanding virtue and understanding vice. And then he also quotes in this work here about the ring of Gyges. The ring of Gyges, if that's the way you pronounce it. A ring that Gyges found in another myth. And when he put this ring on and turned it in a certain direction, he became invisible. And suddenly he started to realise that he could get whatever he wanted, however he wanted to get it, and there'd be no consequences because he'd be invisible. As the story goes about Gyges, he uses this in the vice direction. Kills the people he doesn't like. Takes the wife of the guy that he wants. Anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. Takes the wife, makes himself extremely wealthy. All because he knew that he could get away with it. So the challenge that I would be putting to young people in the school today would be tell them that story and say, what are you like when you're on your own? What would you be like if you could get away with something? And so we move away from performance to moral character. Because you can have good behaviour in a classroom and still be a rascal or a scoundrel. You've just learned to control it here and do it out there. To be the quality of person that you should be. So schools must include how to resolve situations where moral goodness clashes with expediency, using the terminology of Cicero. Well, moving on to one of our church fathers, St. Clement of Alexandria. And I think the church fathers, as all been referred to today, would be saying to the young people of today, what you need to do in the midst of your culture is find time to consider wonder and transcendency. What are you doing about discovering wonder? Well, they know how to find stimulation and gratification and how to have everything right now, wherever I want it, however I want it. But what are we doing about helping young people find wonder and transcendence? So I think schools today must teach the students what there is in terms of the eternal, what there is in terms of transcendence. And it needs to pass on to young people that the earth is transient and that our life on the earth is transient, but there still exists right now a supernatural realm that they can experience and discover. I'm moving on to Augustine. Oh, where do you go with Augustine? He certainly wrote a lot, as we've heard already this morning. But where I would go is to the Confessions. And I'd go to what I find is such a powerful statement for our young people. And I think they can resonate with this, where he said that you have made me for yourself, and my heart is restless until it finds its rest in you. The bit that I'd be emphasising to young people would be, let me tell you where your restlessness comes from. And your restlessness is coming because you're not loving things the way they should be loved. This idea of disordered loves that Augustine talks about. And reordering your loves to love things the way they should be loved. Love them wrong and things will be restless for you. And I think every young person knows when they've got a restless heart. And put before them that it doesn't have to be that way. That God hasn't made them to be restless. God's made them to be restless so that they find Him. And once we find Him, we'll find peace. When we continue to love things the right way. Well, Aquinas, he'd be saying, I think, to us, it's about virtues. It's about living in community according to the virtues of prudence and justice and temperance and fortitude, along with the theological virtues of faith, hope and charity. It's about the person you are becoming. And I'd be wanting to tell young people to focus on developing virtuous character, who see the importance of the way they live their lives before God and the way they live their lives with their neighbour. Well, that's number 6. Number 7, John Comenius. John Comenius was instrumental in writing some of the early textbooks in the 1600s, 1700s that were used quite widely in Europe. And his opening lines is this: Vine puer, dulce sapere, which translated is, come child, learn to be wise. What can we do about putting before our young people the goal of becoming wise? Not rich, not famous, but to become wise. Language that needs to return to our schools on developing wise students. How do you become wise? Interesting concept. Interesting discussion we can have. But this is where it fits in very much within an educational context, because you can learn wisdom from looking at the decisions that have been made in times past. The folly and the wise decisions of previous generations. Jumping forward to C.S. Lewis, who writes that brilliant work on the abolition of man. And it's actually a critique of English curriculum in the 1960s. And what he talks about there is the observation of a waterfall. Is the observation of the waterfall, listening to two people talk about it, was it pretty or was it sublime? Is what I'm seeing something I'm going to give a value to, or is there value in it that I'm going to discover? And it helps you see how much this has infiltrated our culture. The wrong concept is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That's an 1880 comment. Beauty is not in the eye of the beholder. The beauty is in the creation by God of something that is operating the way that it's supposed to operate. There's beauty in this chair because it's upholding you. You're able to sit on it. It's doing its job. It's beautiful. It's not whether they are like the cushions or whatever. It's functioning the way God had made it. He knew that we would need a seat, and so he said, it's simple. You can make a chair. This is a beautiful chair. And once you start helping young people see the world that way, it's not whether I like the colour or whatever. See how we go the wrong way about trying to identify what's true, and what's beautiful, and what's good. And if we can turn that around, that'd be brilliant. So in Lewis's work, he talks about the Tao, and he talks about pointing to truth, beauty and goodness. And I think if he was here today, he'd be saying, Richard, include that in your school. Truth, beauty and goodness. Joseph Piper wrote a fascinating book called Leisure. And he actually wrote it to talk about education. The original word for leisure in Greek is skole. In Latin, they translate it to schola, from which we get the word school. School's supposed to be about leisure. Now, we've got such a poor understanding of leisure that we think, yippee, that just means I'm out in the playground all day. Leisure is actually being able to be still and to be silent and to understand what you're part of. The idea of stopping from work to be able to understand what life is all about. So Piper would be talking about restore leisure to young people today, which is to teach connection, contemplation and celebration. Connection, contemplation and celebration. That will encourage some leisure. Well, I've tried to put a lot into this, and I now want to just draw all this to a conclusion. Happy to talk more over lunch or whatever if you find any of this interesting. So where I'm up to at the moment, there's 4 words that I'd love to see introduced into education that I think wrap up the advice that I'm hearing from these 9 so wise people. That I think if these were included in a school, authentic humanism would be the result. The first one is telos, the Greek word for purpose. What story am I part of? What's all this about? Connect me to something that's transcendent. Connect me to something which is moving and real, and I can connect my wagon to. The telos. Helps students see that they are in a story and that their lives have purpose and a duty. Present to students the concept of wonder and transcendence. I'd put all that under the word telos. My second word is polis. The idea of community. Help students find their place in their school community, surrounded by imperfect people with whom they're going to do life together, guided by wise and caring teachers who are committed to their formation. 6 hours, if it is that, wherever you've come from, of students being together day by day. And if our focus is just on their mind, of getting them to learn their mathematics or learning their English or doing this, competing in this team, then I think we're missing a wonderful opportunity to actually help them know how to interact with other people who are as imperfect as they are. The third one, so it's telos, polis, third one is virtue. If we could restore the word virtue into schools. You know what's replaced virtue in schools these days? Values. That's like, choose your menu. Choose the ones you want. But when you come to an understanding of virtues, they're there. They're well tried. They are historical. And it takes out the choice nature of it. So I'd be saying to young people, become people of virtue. Become people of character. Persevere. And lots of stories I could tell you that I've encountered about Cyrus, about how he led by example, how he is virtuous in what he did. And the last one that I'd love to see added into a school curriculum is wisdom. Wisdom. Help students want to know more and to benefit from the inheritance of the profound thinking and insights gained over centuries. Help them ask questions and to seek after truth. As you can see, I haven't talked about the Australian curriculum. That'll take care of itself, and there's jurisdictions that will worry about that. But as an educator, I wish I had my time over again, where I could now start doing what I think is real education of young people, to talk about telos, polis, virtue, and wisdom. Thank you.